And we're live. Welcome to Music Matters 2020. I'm your host, Jason Tramm, and we're delighted that you can join us for Music Matters 2020, where we discuss the issues in classical music and the challenges we all face as seen through the eyes of distinguished colleagues. Please remember to subscribe to us on YouTube and hit that bell for the most up-to-date information on upcoming guests and topics. Share our videos and join our community. We are the fastest growing classical music podcast on YouTube, and we're so delighted that you have joined us and spending time with us, and thank you so much. To see our upcoming events, our upcoming guests, and our past episodes, go to my website at www.jasontram.net. And this is our 51st episode, and we're delighted you can be here today. We have a wonderful guest, a rising star composer in the classical music world, Mr. Jake Landau. So welcome, Jake.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, Jake, it says here that you've had your works performed by the New York Philharmonic, the Houston Grand Opera, in such a distinguished concert venues as the Geffen Concert Hall, Carnegie Hall, Royal Palace of Amsterdam. Wow, that's quite an accomplishment for someone so young. So, tell us about how did you start the composition field, and how did you get started in music in general?
Sure. Well, I began actually as an actor and singer in musical theater. At the time, I'm talking about, around middle school, and I was acting and singing in musical theater, and I was writing these extremely long fantasy novels, really like 400-page ridiculous stuff like that. And somehow my love of world building and creation in that way, plus theater and music, led to composition. So
you started writing the text first. That's interesting.
Sort of, yeah. I suppose I did. And then I was taking piano at the time. I remember one time I was actually, I'm sure this has happened actually to a lot of musicians who are now in opera. I was on stage until the director realized I sounded much better in the pit. And so I was relegated to the piano. And I found that in accompanying musicals, When I was playing underscoring, in fact, when I changed the smallest thing, I added a note to the harmony, I took something away, I changed the voicing, it dramatically altered the drama of the piece, and how the actors on stage would respond to it, I found really fascinating. So starting from that point, the director put me in touch with this composer named Lawrence Rosen, who is a fantastic musical theater composer, lives in Jersey, and lyricist. And yeah, the rest is history.
So you did your studies at the Juilliard School, studying under none other than John Corigliano. So what was that like? Boy, John Corigliano, he's won every major award a composer can win. What was it like studying with such a luminary?
Yeah, so I entered Juilliard pre-college 2 years before I entered the college level. I studied with Dr. Andrew Thomas, who is also a fantastic composer. And because of Larry and Dr. Thomas's preparations, I could I was able to skip through a lot of the ear training, music theory stuff, just because I had that old school mentorship style of education before I got to college. So thankfully, John Corigliano thought I was ready for him, which is pretty cool. I'm the youngest student he's ever taken. I was 17 at the time. He is amazing. He is, in addition to being a fantastic composer, an extremely nice person, hilarious, and I love hanging out with him. I go to his country house a lot in upstate New York, which is super nice. Yeah, it was really inspiring to study with him. His big thing for all his students, and all of his students will tell you this, by the way, is structure. Coming from the theater, for me, I was more interested in a 3-minute piece, a 5-minute piece. And then you study with John Corigliano, who's most famous for pieces of his that are over half an hour, or over an hour, including his fantastic opera, Ghosts of Versailles, big inspiration. And he would create these graphs and make his students do the same, that were color-coded, and they were basically charting the drama of the piece. Okay, we rise, which doesn't necessarily correlate with dynamic, but often does. And here's the loudest point, and here's the quietest point, and how do you get there? What materials are you using? And I found that I thought that way in my head a lot already because of theater, but to actually write it down was extremely illuminating. And he is, people think of him as a symphonist, which, and he deserves that title. He's fantastic. He's really a theater guy. He's really like a theatrical construction guy. And it shows. His husband, Mark Adamo, is a fantastic opera composer. They are, and also a frequent collaborator in theater works. And both of them are just so theatrically minded. I find it really interesting, and I love studying with them because of it.
Yeah, his Ghost of Versailles, what a masterpiece that is. We've had a few people who were in the original production, a couple of singers in the cast. And
oh my God, that's so cool.
It's such an interesting work. When I saw that live, it just blew my mind. It's so creative, the way he synthesizes musical style with his own voice at the same time. And what's it like writing in the operatic vein or the vocal vein? You've got so many centuries of accrued great composers. What's it like finding your voice as a composer?
I want to answer that, but first I have to mention Ghosts of Versailles was just done, I think last year, 2 years ago, at Versailles. By the way, for those who don't know, the Ghosts of Versailles opera is an opera by John Corigliano that is about the Marie Antoinette's ghost and Beaumarchais' ghost, whatever, all haunting Versailles and unable to move on from their lives. So it takes place in Versailles, and they actually staged a version in the actual Versailles, in the actual theater that they are parodying, and there's a DVD. I think it's really great. Okay, sorry. Anyway, so about finding my voice in opera. So I actually have very much, and I know that voice is something a lot of composers very fairly struggle with. For me, opera helped me find my voice because I have always been really passionate about the connection between opera and musical theater. America, they're seen as two completely different genres. They have two different sort of financial systems behind them. The people who perform in one don't often perform in the other, and vice versa, with very notable exceptions. But in general, they're very two different worlds. But I've had a lot of interest in old American music, 1800s, 1700s American music. And by looking at that, you can actually trace how musical theater and opera are part of the same timeline, and how just a changing set of emphases in terms of what an audience is looking for, etc., have shaped what once was opera into musical theater. But fundamentally, if you're listening to like a Monteverdi opera or something, which is, about as old as it gets, you're just listening to really old. Um, and I find that my favorite productions are people who treat it as such.
Who are some of your favorite influences in the musical theater genre today?
Oh boy. Okay. Um, well, there's obviously Stephen Sondheim, living legend. I find how he has handled sort of recitative to be really fascinating. I find his integration of recitative into like large scale aria really powerful. Um, I mean, I actually think I have probably more influences in opera, though I might be writing more musical theater these days. Um, just because what's of particular interest to me is stuff I can like really study. And for musical theater, like I love old American musical theater. Showboat's my favorite musical of all time. Um, but at the end of the day, the elements that make a musical work, flow, and great are really hard to scholastically pursue. And so I find that what's actually consciously, actively influencing me more is like harmonies and dramatic styles and melodic structures from opera, from older shows.
So,
I don't know if you would know that hearing listening to my stuff, but that's how I
what have
feel.
you written the most of so far? Have you written most of chamber music? Have you done full symphonic? What's been the immediate thrust of your work?
I'm Corigliano's Black Swan, by which I mean, or Ugly Duckling. I don't know what you'd call it. In that I'm one of the few non-symphonists to have come out of his studio. I don't really write much for orchestra. I have a piece called Hardware Love, published by Edition Peters, which is like a 5-minute orchestral opener, which is a piece I really love. Uh, but or the orchestra itself, enormous ensembles, are not where I have um, not what I've gravitated to, which I suppose in COVID is maybe a good thing for now. But I find I sound most like myself when I'm writing small chamber ensemble pieces. A piano, a string, maybe some electronics, and a voice is like one of my favorite things. Yeah, most of my work I'd say is for small ensemble, and recently, especially for theatrical forces of some kind, whether you call it a musical or an opera, and what you call it does matter. Whatever you call it, I'm most interested in music for the stage.
And how do you find libretti? How do you find collaborators to work with? It's always the challenge when you do theatrically based music to find quality libretti, and I think that goes back to the very beginnings of opera as well.
Sure. So in art song, composers take poetry, right? They'll take something by Walt Whitman and set it to music. I've found what makes lyrics unique, and what I look for is words that are specifically designed to be sung. I find, for example, when I set Shakespeare, that I'm completely overwhelmed and distracted because the words in and of themselves are a complete thing, and my music in and of itself is a complete thing, and together it's just like I have no idea what is happening. And I know that's not how a lot of composers feel. A lot of them feel like you want to choose the best text you can. I find that lyric writing is completely different than poetry or prose. So it's interesting when you read something like Oscar Hammerstein II's lyrics on the page. They're great, they're good, they're interesting, but they're not complete. It's only when they're fitted to music that they are like, oh my God, how could anything be this good? So it's difficult to judge a lyricist from the page because a lot of it is musicality, is meter. I write a lot of my own lyrics, having trained with Lawrence Rosen. When I was younger, completely different art form than composition, completely different skill set. And additionally, I worked with a couple friends of mine. One friend named Sarah Gottlieb on the libretto of my first musical, and once with Emily of mine for this show I'm currently writing, and also with Andrea DelGiudice. All my librettists have been women. Interesting. And Andrea DelGiudice and I co-wrote this libretto for our current project, and what's currently taking up most of my time in a fantastic way, which is an opera in one act called Pieta.
Now,
I think we'll get.
Is this your first operatic composition, your first fully staged opera that you've put together?
Yes. Yeah, I did this really interesting, really masochistic workshop when I was younger, which was basically this guy came in when I was in grad school, and he said, he cut out a bunch of newspaper headlines and pictures, and he was like, okay, you have the weekend to turn this into a 3-minute opera for 2 people. So I worked with a friend of mine at the time, Harris Ferguson, and we did it. Ours came out to be 10 minutes long, not 3 minutes long, but it was really interesting and fun. And I still, I really still stand by that piece. It's called Birds of Paradise. It's very weird. It's for 2 voices and piano. Previous, I suppose, staged opera experience I have. Yeah.
I love working with modern composers, and I love conducting modern music. And I'm always amazed by seeing how a new voice and a new way of thinking about things changes how the theater sounds and how it grows. And I just love to experiment with that. So what's been like for you to write in a larger form, like a 1-act opera? How has that been for you as a composer?
Interesting question. I have always been most interested, musically speaking, in motivic economy, in motivic development, in unity. And I think it actually goes back to having written fantasy novels when I was young because I had so many friends, where it's about creating a universe, a really cohesive universe that makes sense. Just like when you write a fantasy novel, you need the politics of one region to actually make sense with another. Similarly, you need whatever musical motif you're using to sort of represent this or to elevate this emotion or idea to correlate with this one. If they are opposing ideas in this work of theater, then they have to be opposing musically in some way, literal or more abstract. And so the biggest thing for me writing for something larger, like an hour-long 1-act opera like this, was being able to take those ideas of like motivic economy and actually stretch them out over a much longer period of time. Because anyone can be musically economical and have a really tight piece in a 2-minute piano work, but in a multiple character theatrical thing, how do you make everything feel like it belongs in the same fantasy world? And so that was the most interesting thing.
It's fascinating to extrapolate how the large forms have to be maintained, how your sense of unity with the libretto is. Did you seek any help or any guidance from your mentor, John Corigliano, when you were putting this together?
Yes. He has. He always expresses interest in what I'm doing, and he always has fascinating things to say. I find that it's like he's one of these people that's super macrocosmically minded. In other words, he's really interested in getting the full picture, and I'm excited to get with this new project. But something else is that he's really interested in melody. The only actual lesson I've had on melodic construction has been with him, because my other teachers were all prescribed to the belief that is, I think, still mostly true, that either you can write a melody or you can't, because innate. It's kind of like having social skills. Not that I know anything about that, but like either you know people well enough and like know how to do things with your body and hands and voice to make someone to sell something or not. That's the common belief, like who taught Irving Berlin how to write a melody like that? No one. Who taught, you can teach someone the kind of extreme and crazy development that a composer like Beethoven has. Theoretically, you can get into that, you can analyze it, but you can't teach them how to have written that melody from the slow movement of the Fifth Symphony. But I did have a lesson on melodic construction with John Corigliano, which I remember to this day, which was super fascinating because I've never really broken it down into cells like that. And his way really works. I mean, no one really thinks of him as like necessarily as the greatest melodist in the world when one considers his major achievements in like structure and harmony and like orchestration. But that man can write a melody, and like he's shown me more methodically than any other teacher I've had how, which is interesting because for him, it's not the Mozart Chopin yes, my manuscript paper is like so flawless. When I have to delete a bar, I like draw a delicate little X on it because it's just like whatever. His is the more Beethovenian where it's like I have to scratch out.
It's a work in progress, right? It's a work in.
Yeah, exactly. And I do prescribe more. I have some like manuscript paper here.
And you actually use manuscript paper? A young composer writing manuscript paper? I'm amazed.
Yeah, I'm telling you, this is how you know I was taught old school, is because I handwrite everything. Okay, like for example, my handwriting isn't terrible. There's certainly quite a bit better handwriting out there, but I tend to like have it done in my head before I start writing. But my point is that John showed me how to break down a melody. And how, it's not necessarily just like download the light from angels above and like out comes a perfect melody, which it sometimes is, but it can also be like actually very methodical. No one has really taught melodic writing like he has.
Well, we have our first question from the audience. This is from Mary from Staten Island, and she asks, how do you get your inspiration? Like when just general, how do you find your inspiration?
Interesting.
And you mentioned the light from the heavens coming down, and there's your melody. So let's say you hit a writer's block.
Yeah.
And how do you gain that again?
Well, let me specify that light from the heavens is a very capital R romantic ideal that I actually have very little to do with, except sometimes in regards to melody. And by the way, from the heavens and occasionally from good melody, but it just comes naturally, I don't. I find I have my sets of, I have my things that I'm interested in doing musically, and then I have interested in, and I put them together, and that's not just how theater happens, but also how chamber music, how instrumental music happens. It's all sort of character driven. It's all dramatically, there's a dramatic impetus behind everything, even if it's abstract. I hope that answers the question.
I think so. Very interesting to see the inner workings of a composer. So the libretto for Pieta, this piece, this new opera that's being composed, was written by Andrea DelGiudice. And so tell us about, I know she's going to be on today to talk about this. What was it like to work with a librettist and to sit down and do that collaboration? Describe the collaborative process between a librettist and a composer that is the magic of opera.
Sure. So libretto writing for an opera is very different than it is for musicals. So in a libretto, typically, what you have to do is you have to decide what are the big singing moments. And whenever you watch interviews of like musical theater giants of the past, and I'm sure this if media like that existed when Mozart was alive, he would say the same thing, or any opera composer, is this thing that's really stressful is not like the images or whatever. The thing that's really stressful is what moments to musicalize. In other words, in drama where there's dialogue, let's say, unsung, where do the people start singing? That's a huge thing because when they start singing, what they sing, the words have to change. There's because you go from prose composition, occasionally set as recitative, into lyrical word composition, which is its own thing. So there's always give and take between the librettist and the composer with that. What's interesting about Pieta, I mean, okay, I'm a word nerd, I'm a word person, and so I'm really obsessed with rhymes. I really like to that fit to music. Andrea's role as co-librettist was this like she had the characters and she informed. I mean, this opera is about very powerful women coming to terms with their power, and Andrea herself having to come to terms with her power could inform that experience so much. And so she was really a guide in terms of character arc. Like that is what I like really needed her for, and I think she really came through.
And have you finished recording? The opera has been recorded in film form?
Okay, this is really this is where we start to do really interesting things, I think. So the opera had a I suppose somewhat conventional creation process in the sense that it was commissioned by the Andrea DelGiudice and the Narnia Festival to be premiered actually this past summer in 2020. Of course, that didn't happen, especially because it was Italy, of all places. And
I was looking forward to being there, so I completely understand.
I know, I would have seen you there. But instead it's been, postponed to 2021. But so it was commissioned in a rather traditional way. But then once this COVID thing happened, Andrew and I got together and we had this really cool idea we wanted to do some sort of a recording. We wanted to do it somehow in New York. We're both in New York. Andrea DelGiudice also happens to be one of the foremost vocal teachers in New York City. And so she has the studio of the most talented, ridiculously amazing singers, just like, available and all looking to do something new. And so we ended up putting together this reading, but we decided to film it very unconventionally. We filmed it as if it were actually a piece of cinema. So I think we call it like a reading reimagined. We worked with a friend of mine named Jacob Maximilian Barron, who's a fantastic video editor, cinematographer, to create this hybrid. It's like a movie, but it's also a reading, like behind music stands and partial costume. And overall, it's something that I think any sort of opera company could look at and put their own ideas onto. But at the end of the day, it tells the story in a really unique way. Certainly unique to opera, but I think to any sort of like theatrical reading.
Well, I'm so excited to air this promo that you're going to play today. Of course, Andrea is a dear friend of mine, and she's a friend of the show. She's been on the show, and she's been mentioned in a lot of the episodes. And I hear a rumor that she's going to be here today. There's a DelGiudice rumor of that. So why don't we play the? This is the promo clip. What are we going to see on this clip?
So this is our teaser trailer for the opera's release, which we're announcing on this podcast as November 7th. So what you'll see here is you'll hear a bit of the music for Pieta. You'll see what the cinematography is like, get some pictures, and it's short. It's just a little teaser, but yeah, you'll get to see what I mean when I say it's cinematic, but also we're reading behind music stands with sort of costumes and yeah, you'll see.
Well, here is the trailer for Pieta, the new opera that's coming out on November 7th. Is the stream of the opera. Here we go. And we're back, and we've invited Andrea DelGiudice to join us. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Glad to be here.
So this was you've been telling me about this project for a long time, and I'm always excited. We've worked together on many different things, and it's always a pleasure. And you told me I have to meet Jake, and I'm so glad you put us in touch. This is one of the bright voices of this generation, I believe, compositionally speaking. And what's it like to put something like this together with a bright new star in the field? And
You know, I remember hearing Jake's music for the first time at Juilliard. Alexia and my daughter Alexia is a violist, and she and Jake were at school together. And she came home and said, "Oh, I have this friend. He's amazing, and he wrote this cool piece for viola." And I said, "Oh, great!" And piano. So I went to this composer's workshop. And he wrote a piece called Stasis, and John Corigliano was there. It was I guess, a class type of situation. I think that's right, Jake. And I sat there and listened to it and went, whoa, who is this guy? Who is this kid? And I never forgot how I felt about complexity, but also beauty in everything that he'd done. So he and my daughter worked a number of times. And then in her senior recital at Juilliard, as a surprise, which was basically almost like the encore of the recital, and everybody was there, for her recital. And she came and she announced, "I wanted to surprise the most important person in my life, my mother, with Jake Landau's rendition of My Man's Gone Now, because I was singing this when I was a little girl."
I was there. I was there for that recital, and it was a highlight for sure.
It was just amazing. And so I kept that in my heart for such a long time, and always wanted to keep track of what Jake was doing. He went off to Oxford, so forth. And I was I've mentioned this on the previous show, but I've been directing operas. Jason Tramm's responsible for the first one, and really concentrating on, as Jake mentioned before, strong women, and not only strong women, but the real stories behind the women of these operas, and which are generally depicted as victims, right? So I've sung many of these operas, most of the Puccini and Verdi's, and I thought, there's a reason where, how everything comes to fruition. And I want to know about their lives, those women's lives beforehand. So after directing both Traviata and Carmen in my conceptual pieces, I decided in Narnia to do Suor Angelica. And I said, I don't want to just do Suor Angelica. I want to tell her story. I want to know where she came from. Like, how did this all come to be? So I started doing research and came upon a very true, tragic story in Toom, Ireland, Galway, Ireland, an institution called the Home for Mothers and run by a French nuns called the Bon Secours Sisters in about 1945 and closed until 1969. And it basically, out of wedlock, young pregnant women, sometimes in their late teens, and they were made to do heavy labor, and they were kept there. They would have their children, their babies, and they'd be kicked out within 3. The institution kept the children. So I thought, oh my God, I remembered seeing Agnes of God, the film, ago.
Sure.
Before I sang Suor Angelica, and I thought, this is actually more common than we know. And so in my investigative work, I did tremendous research of this particular Galway institution, and Catherine Corliss, the researcher, just a person from the town who remembered these children at school, and uncovered some incredible, for me, parallels in terms of where Suor Angelica derived its real roots. Now, I know Puccini didn't know of this institution, but lives of women and where they've come from, what's been hidden, secrets are so much at the base of all of both Pieta and Suor Angelica. So when I decided I wanted to direct Suor Angelica and really introduce this concept of this very, very sad fact that these institutions even still exist in these days, I said, how can we talk about the history of Angelica? Where did the Principessa come from? Right? Who was she? How did this relationship come to be before all of this? So I think I was talking to Alexia, and I just said, Alexia, can we talk to Jake? Like, do you think he'd be interested in something like this? And she goes, he's super busy. I said, yeah, can we just see what he thinks about this? So I twisted her neck and said, contact Jake. And then Jake and I started to discuss it, and he was very interested in the idea, and he started doing his research too. And we came to find this institution in Italy called the Ospedale della Pietà in Venice, which is it's a very famous institution in itself. It was called an asylum at one time, but probably the most famous story that came out of it is that these women also basically imprisoned, or in a sense sent there to study music, but many of them had some kind of maladies, or there could have been women out of wedlock, whatever. They were in this institution, and Vivaldi came and taught lessons, taught music to these women, and they became the foremost famous orchestra in Europe. And I'd heard about them because there's a chamber group in Italy that's been using their name, and there were women trying to continue on basically the history of this in some way. But Jake really delved into this, and he came back and said, what if this was where Pieta occurred, and then we could converge the stories, and then we were off to the races.
Brilliant.
And so the story of Pieta is so incredible, but what's also breathtaking in my work with Jake in the collaboration, because this is the first time I've done something like this, obviously on just a creation level, right? I've taken operas traditionally and I've reinvented without touching the music ever. And I remember talking to Jake about the libretto and about even the images we would use to depict Pieta, and in so entwining it. And he was talking about poetry earlier, and I just wanted to mention this. He brought me a quote from a poet by the name of Marian Angus from Ireland, and it was so, when he brought me this quote, I'm using it everywhere. I'm using it in my notes for my director because it's just informed me and it's inspired me. And the quote is, quote unquote, "A hurt so small will wear my life away." And I don't know if there's anything more succinct and more heartfelt than this being the truth about the story of Suor Angelica. And as you will see, as you experience our new opera, what happened beforehand? Who was the Principessa? Right? Where did she come from? What was the interaction? What actually happened? And I'm never allowed to do spoilers. Jake forbids me. So there is, a tremendous connection between how Angelica came to know the Principessa, and then what that looked like in terms of when the Principessa came to the institution where Suor Angelica was. So I'm blabbing too much, but I wanted to give a context.
So important how a collaboration like this occurs, to find a tie-in between Suor Angelica, which is one of the most famous and most performed one-act operas, with I love this pairing of old and new. I think the new really sheds light on the old in such an interesting way, and this is very exciting. I can't wait to hear the premiere of this piece. When you had the libretto for the first time, Jake, what was it like? Did you write one of the pieces? What piece did you write first? What grabbed you about the libretto? What grabbed you about the concept?
Which aria? Which piece did I write first?
I know. Hold on.
Do you remember?
You wrote.
Okay.
Alma's.
Alma's aria first?
I think. Wait, no, you're wrong. I'm wrong.
I think I wrote the duet at the beginning. Okay. Okay. Okay.
You're right. Was
so,
it right?
Okay. Both Suor Angelica and Pieta are about the institutionalization of women, and also a lot about motherhood, and about mercy. Pieta is Italian for mercy, and most specifically, the Christian mercy, or that image of Mary holding Jesus after he's come down off the cross. Pieta, this Ospedale della Pietà, which we both found so interesting, this institution which took in women, taught them musical instruments, which including instruments like the cello and bass, which women were not supposed to be learning at the time, and then had them perform from behind a lattice, out of sight, to become the foremost orchestra in Europe at the time. I obviously found fascinating. I mean, do I have personal experience being locked away in an institution with a bunch of very talented musicians trying to come to terms with my own mental health? Yes.
I think we all do. I think all musicians do, right?
Exactly. Relatable content. And I'm desperate for relatable content these days. So I found that really interesting. And it started with this idea of mercy, right? Mercy, where do you turn when you require it? Do you turn to the person you wronged? Do you turn to God? And I started with this idea of you must have mercy on yourself. The refrain of one of the biggest arias in the show, called "Take It From Me," is all about that line. You must have mercy. How does it go? You can look to your God or your friend, but in the end, neither will truly set you free. You must have mercy on yourself. Take it from me. Right. So that idea I found really, well, first of all, very modern and very interesting. And I think you talk about the old, this very contemporary concept of like coming to terms with one's own self, and like I think can be extrapolated in this sort of like religious context, like to having mercy on yourself for your wrongs. And so a big fan of Puccini and Suor Angelica, and I always found the scene between the Principessa and Suor Angelica like so charged. And I don't know with what. In every production, the director gives those actors something different, but I found it extremely just like heavy, and so I was like, okay, what can I do to make this interaction even more intense and more charged? And so I wrote this like, I mean, it's basically operatic fan fiction, you know, this internet craze. So I was like, okay, how can I take the Principessa and turn her into someone who we really relate to and whose point of view we understand in this? Because in Suor Angelica, she's a villain. That's basically it. And so I'm like, okay, how can we actually feel for this villain? And then I also took a bunch of little things from Suor Angelica, little details that Puccini includes. For example, when the Principessa comes in the libretto, it actually says that she walks with an ebony cane. And I was like, okay, how can I give a reason for that? And like all of these things led to one another. And I took quite a bit musically from Suor Angelica here and there, most especially the bells, the Dies Irae bells you hear at the beginning. I took that bells, which by the way comes from an old chant, so it's not original to Puccini either, and turned them into basically La Principessa's guilt idea. And so they're recurring in their head and they're driving her crazy, these bells. And then, of course, when Pieta ends and Suor Angelica begins after an intermission, we're like, it's the bells. So like, you know, it's all about, I saw the plants, and then I decided what seeds they came from, which was a really fascinating process because my opera comes before Suor Angelica's in the right. Yeah.
Wow. So what other Puccini operas have fired your imagination? Are you a big Puccini fan?
Huge Puccini fan. I mean, La Boheme is, I think, the greatest work of music theater of any kind ever. Certainly that first act is probably the most perfectly constructed act dramatically of anything ever. I'm really into Il Tabarro. I find that one really interesting. That's my horse that doesn't get enough credit.
You and Mark Delavan, who was on my show a couple weeks ago, we talked to him. He goes, "They don't do Tabarro enough these days."
That was my debut in Bonn. I sang Giorgetta as my debut in Bonn. One of my favorite roles I've ever sung in my life. It's just incredible. The opera is like, can't be only that short. It feels like a lovely lifetime of singing in that story. It's wonderful.
It always reminds me of Porgy and Bess because of that maritime 12/8 music. I don't know, but I love it. One of the most interesting things I've been influenced by in terms of Puccini is how he does recitative is fascinating. You can probably tell by now, like, I mean, in terms of melody, it's like you can write it or you can't. And then in terms of dialogue, I just have to underscore it, which I find fun and interesting. But recitative is where I can get really experimental and weird and strange. And so I love the way Puccini does this recitative thing where he'll like take a melody from an aria and play it in the orchestra, and then everyone else is just sort of like parlando, talking over it. And I really wanted to put that to use, especially in this opera, because it really, there's details like that which maybe don't unite the two operas necessarily to like an everyday audience member, but which certainly subconsciously unite Suor Angelica and Pieta and make them feel like they are part of the same universe.
Have you had any influence from Wagner in your writing and in your musical sphere?
No, I haven't, and I'm afraid it is as simple as that. I mean, motif. I mean, of course, leitmotif is everyone thinks of Wagner. I find it. I've never really been a giant fan of Wagner. I find that he is the most capital R romantic. His approach to drama and music, and to a certain extent, you can gain an interesting perspective by separating the man from the music. Just because you like his music doesn't mean you like Nazis or whatever. But a lot of his musical decisions are informed by his personality, and in a way much more traceable than in a lot of other composers. And Wagner is, I mean, he doesn't need me to tell him he's a genius or me to fight for his reputation. But I have found little influence in Wagner because I think we use motifs very differently.
Sure.
But the idea is there.
Okay,
yeah.
Appreciate that. So Andrea, what's it? What can we expect to see with this production? What's some of your director's input on this? I know we've worked there on multiple projects. I love the way you approach the strong female characters, even in traditional operas. I can't wait to see in a new opera how you apply that and what your vision is on this one.
I think what is the most important to me, both, I guess, in the productions that I've directed and also how I'm approaching both of these pieces, is that I don't develop a concept or research and bring those characters to fruition to say you have to like them. I don't care about that. My Carmen was very unlikable, right? But for a very specific reason, for a reason in terms of where she came from. So without spoiling anything, I just want to put a little bit in context. When we come into Pieta, and the Principessa, whose name is Edita, she's maybe in her mid-30s. She's visited by her niece, Angelica, who's 13. So just wrap your heads around that for a second, because that completely changes how they met, what was this context. Edita loved her niece, Angelica, and then something happened. And I won't spoil it, but that's very much at the helm of, where did Angelica come from? What happened to her? Where did Edita come from? What happened to her? And so all of this history, but relationship, and who was Edita initially? Why do we see her as this villain in Suor Angelica? I just watched the Netflix series Ratched with Sarah Paulson.
I'm just about to watch that. So what do you think about that one?
Let me tell you something. I gotta say, as I'm watching Ratched, I'm thinking, this could have been Edita. I mean, I really have to say that there is, it was a little freaky because a lot of the things that happened in the series I've already put together in our productions. But what I want to say is that a woman's story, there are so many similarities in experiences. I was just speaking to a friend today about saying, I won't say exactly what I was saying, but in my colleagues and my friends, as I speak to women, there were things that we shared that every single one of us shared, and they weren't all good. Many were not good. And because there is this reticence to tell a woman's true story or underneath that, and I have to say that I believe that most of that is because they're male composers, and until many recent years, there haven't been many female directors either, right? So the truth of Edita, and of course it's created by Jake and I, there became a reason I wanted to connect these two things. And I think when we're talking about something traditional and something modern, I think in the way we treat our two operas, it's also very important to me to not label it or make it only one stylistic way. I do want there to be flexibility. However, the characters and the thematic concept of it, I want Jake and I to very formally keep intact, and this is something that we feel is very special. But Pieta, the language language and the stylistic component, although he uses elements, of course, of Puccini, he has a very unique style of his own, which is very between musical theater and opera, which is also, I watched the trailer, and the very last scene of that beautiful girl's face, just wrap your mind around this. That's Genoveva, the Genoveva that's in who appears in burst into tears the first time I saw the trailer, right? So it has deep meaning, and the two chords as they come to the end, where Jake literally put together his motifs and his themes, and he repeats it that way. It's like, so I'm so overwhelmed, excited about finally being able to show this on the 7th of November, and then to see how this is, brought about to industry, and who's like dying to.
Well, I wish you both the best. It's very exciting to hear these plans come together. And, normally as a conductor like myself and you would get together, when we get together, we always have 3-hour conversations about art and music and life. And we would talk about, we would have these conversations about what the backstory is of any of these operas. We would have these normally over a cup of coffee or something stronger, and we would discuss these topics. It must be so exciting to flesh it out and to come up with such an interesting tapestry of art. So very exciting.
Yeah, it's really...
go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna say, again, to go back to your juxtaposition of old and new idea, Jason. Like female roles for women in opera historically have evolved with the voice type in an interesting way. By which I mean 300 years ago, where people wanted to perceive women as like sort of otherworldly and not quite well-rounded humans necessarily. They would all be sopranos or spintos or whatever. And you don't have to. You can't really hear the words as clearly as with a lower voice, as when they're singing their chest voice. There's this stuff which doesn't matter if they're not really considered, dramatically important people, humans. And then what I found really fascinating is here is La Principessa in Sforanciale. Puccini lists as a contralto. And what that means to me, and this is, only 100 years ago, whatever. It's not like 300 years ago. What that means to me is here is a woman with something to say, a woman whose words we have to hear, whose words have complexity enough that her voice needs to be low so that we can really get her story and what she's saying. Suor Angelica, the character, has plenty to say herself and a perfectly complex, interesting character. But the Principessa, her words are like terrifying. She's talking about like voices, spirits, like talking to her in like what made her this way. And so I was like, okay, I want this character to be what Pieta is about. And so creating a role for a lower female voice that sings, a decent amount in their chest is really cool. The coolest thing, one of the coolest things I think that we did with Edita, with the role, is that I asked her to belt. Edita is, she's an operatic contralto. The role is even doable by a mezzo. But there are a few moments in the show where I ask her to, musical theater belt, right in the middle of the staff, give me that money note. And I think it works really well because, one, it's such a shock. Like, opera singers don't belt.
It's like a different color on the artistic palette, right?
Exactly, yeah. It's like you're taking a moment from a Broadway musical, but it's dramatically justified. And there are some singers, most notably Devaney Smith, who is our Evita, who belted the crap out of it. It was amazing. But I'm really interested in exploring how these voice types correlate with like woman's journey to like humanity, like being thought of as people as much as men. How the voice type is related to that journey. And so with La Principessa and thus with Edita, like I find her arriving at a contralto who's singing in her chest, whose words are therefore clearly audible and that has interesting to say. Really fascinating, and I wanted to explore that.
Any new vocal techniques or any neat approaches or incredibly challenging roles in there what's it like writing a role and watching the singers inhabit that role for the first time?
I'm watching Andrea's face go like, oh boy, like, you don't even know. I'll let you answer this question.
Well, I mean, if I could just pick up on where Jake was talking about in terms of that particular role, the role of Edita, where it is a contralto part. Devaney Smith is a mezzo-soprano who transitioned from soprano. She sings an exquisite composer, right, from Ariadne. So you can say, wow, how does that voice also inhabit this lower contralto area? Devaney happens to have the chops to be able to belt and then go back into this luscious sound. So it really, you know, I knew what Jake wanted, and I said, okay, I think I know the right person, you know. And so I think there's also another role in the opera by the name of Fia, who's a street urchin, and this is sung by Seychelle Clavier, who's a fantastic mezzo-soprano on the contralto-ish, but the whole role is almost entirely belted. Now remember that he writes also up into the staff, so if we had just a belter, we may not have an opera, right? Because there has to be this flexibility vocally, which I think we nailed in the cast that we have. But there were challenges. Those two singers in particular were in my studio a lot, trying to work out how do I negotiate this on a physical level and still keep the operatic basis of it. So this is another part of what Jake does that I love, that this is an exploration in maybe bridging this gap between opera and musical theater, and being able to say these two things are possible, because in the end, it comes down to the drama. It comes down to the capacity, the abilities of these singers to really, really tell us their story credibly in their text and with the pathos in their beautiful sound. It's a combination of those two things. It is at the helm of my work as a singer, and also what I expect in singers and what is expected of them in these days, as opposed to what used to be maybe Park and Bark, which is not, it really isn't what it is.
Very
now.
Exciting combination of truly American elements. You've got musical theater, you've got an American composer, and this classical operatic approach. It's very exciting to watch it come together. I can't wait to see it all fleshed out. Hey, Jake, have you done the orchestration yet? Have you started to orchestrate it in your mind? I'm sure you've done a lot of that.
Yeah, well, so, you know, because I handwrite, I actually, I don't write into a piano vocal, I write into a short score. So I've got orchestration notes to myself along the way, like often in weird colors, because I've gone through it afterwards and be like, oh, you know, like xylophone, trombone, you know. So I have my outlines for orchestrating, but I still have to, you know, type it all up and put it into that.
Now, for this production, this is just a reading, so it's with piano, correct?
Yes, just with piano. It's all about the character is all about the drama here. But yeah, I really am into what you just said about it's opera, but it's American. We're using American vocal techniques as well, or at least modern vocal techniques like belting. But also what Andrea was talking about in terms of it's all at the service of the drama. You know, it's not experimentation necessarily for abstract musical sake. I would do that in the concert hall, but on stage, you know, it's just as experimental, or even more so, because you have a dramatic justification to sort of let loose and try new things. And I'm just glad we had such talented singers who were open to that and who could really execute it so well.
Well, very exciting. I want to thank you both for joining me tonight on Music Matters 2020. It's great to hear new voices and old friends, and that's what's great about these podcasts, is bringing people together to talk about new and exciting initiatives. What do you both see, let's go each individually, what do you both see as the future for opera the next couple months, years?
COVID in terms of COVID?
Yeah, COVID, coming out of COVID. What do you both see as the way forward, and what are you imagining?
I'm like an operatic anarchist, so I'll let Andrea take this question for now.
Well, you know, I have to understand my whole life has been in my whole career has been as a singer in opera, and then a teacher, and now a director, and I think that this too shall pass. I think that, of course, my colleagues, my dear agent friends, everyone is in a very, very difficult place right now, financially based as well as health, but just in terms of what's happening. But I think if we can all hang in there for another year, I think that things will start to come back. I do think that this influence, at least what we've decided to do, which is to bring this film sort of what we're doing, is bringing it in some cases. I'm hopeful that it's a little bit more exciting for the younger generation. Let's face it, when we say old and new, he's new, I'm old, right? So with that, and then
You're not old.
Far from it. Far from it.
well, but I mean, it's kind of beautiful that the experience and all that I've experienced and the roles and the operas and my experiences in life and his new feeling and his opinions and his desires to put together maybe these two styles. There couldn't be a better way to say, hopefully that's the future of opera. Hopefully this is the beginning of something very new, because I know how unique Jake Landau is. I am unique in the sense that I'll try anything and work towards telling the truth. And I'm just excited to see how this is received in the industry and with artists, with great artists.
Well, it's certainly such challenges. I mean, I love to see creativity. I love to see people's innovation during this most challenging time for all of us. As a conductor, I know I'm facing the same challenges that we all are. And to watch, the reason I founded this podcast is to let people talk about innovation. This is a great innovation. You guys have created a new work of art under the most incredible circumstances. You're bringing it to life, and you were starting to see small companies and talented people do interesting things. I know that my friends at Teatro Graticello are doing they're doing a filmed version. I'm seeing Bear Opera, On-Site Opera. We're seeing all these small companies pick up the void left by the gigantic announcement by the Metropolitan Opera of cessation of the whole season. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, and I'm really glad that. I mean, I think there are two big points for me. One of them is what we've been talking about, which is that to move forward, opera can start welcoming the use of this technology, like filming and stuff like that. I mean, like, there are also some gigantic opera houses where, if you're sitting in the back, you can't really see anyone's face. And, if you go to a pop concert, if you go to a Beyonce concert and you're sitting way in the back, they have these giant screens where you can actually see her face. People want to see the emotion. They want to, and with camera and film, you can actually do that. So I'm really proud of that part of this innovation, that part of this sort of new medium we're working in of reading reimagined, where you get the acting, and the acting really matters. And that actually brings me to the second big point, which is that I think opera going forward needs to acknowledge its place on the timeline of music theater and really come to terms with its place in American culture alongside musical theater, and what is so different about it, what makes it great, and how this sort of split has happened historically, why, in doing so, I think opera will realize what makes it so great and what makes people really want to come watch it. And I really think that's the way forward. This project, whenever I try to walk this line between musical theater and opera, one of my biggest guiding principles is I want to use everyone for the full extent of their skills, like the full extent of their talents. Like, I'm not going to, write something and cast someone who has this amazing operatic soprano and be like, okay, but can you sing this more musical theater-y? That's not what I'm interested in. And I'm not, and vice versa. I want to use everyone's talents to their fullest, and it's about creating dramatic justification for that and having it. And if it's contributing to the overall dramatic effect of the work of music theater or opera, people will love it, and I love it. That's what counts.
I just want to say one quick thing, because I know we have to sign off, but I just want to remind everyone that one of the great productions of La Boheme was Baz Luhrmann's production on Broadway. I mean, I saw it many times, and this is also why Kathy Olson from Encompass Arts was ideal for our project. She's now working in film, television, and opera, and she was the assistant music director of the production with Baz and worked with this film director. So I'm also praying I may be able to work with him in the future. But again, there's been like the cracking of the egg of trying this and successfully trying it. We're just maybe moving it in. I mean, maybe in a sense, there are gifts that come out of COVID, right? There's, as you say, the ingenuity and all of this creativeness that Jason was talking about. You either go there or you sit home and get depressed. I mean, we chose to move forward, and it's a tough time, but I still think that to have constructed this. Let's just see how it goes on November 7th.
So how do people access the stream? How do they become a part of this?
So we'll be sending out a link. It's it's a private event for industry people, for invited guests, and people can get in touch with me at jakelandau.com or Andrea at her website, and we'll happy to talk, happy to provide a link. Basically that's what's going on. We've got a whole invite list of God knows how many people, and we'll be
list, yeah.
We'll be sending that link out following an invitation, and we'll all sit down and press play together on November 7th.
Most exciting. Thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you so much, Jake Landau, two of my one of my dear friends and one of my new friends. So great to meet you both virtually, and I wish you great success on this project.
Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you for having us.
My pleasure. Thank you for joining us for Music Matters 2020, YouTube's fastest growing classical music podcast. And thank you, and make sure you put that on your calendar on November 7th. And look for Pieta by Andrea DelGiudice and Jake Landau. Please remember to hit the subscribe button below and hit that bell for the most up-to-date information on upcoming guests and topics. We have a really wonderful guest coming up this Thursday at 6 o'clock. We have Wenjie Zhang and her husband. They're a musical couple. He plays in the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, and she's a renowned soprano. So make sure you join us for that. And remember to check out our past episodes, our 50 past episodes, plus our upcoming guests on my website at jasontram.net. Thank you so much, and remember, keep music alive. Good night.